Being in the room where it happens is the famous line from Alexander Hamilton. For the last decade of British politics, this man has always been in the room.
I had free reign of number 10.
He has photographed 4 of our Prime Ministers.
Because obviously I had Cameron, May, then Boris.
And who can forget Liz Truss? Even when the most senior advisors leave the room for calls with US presidents, there remains one man standing and capturing the moment for history.
But Obama was very cool. If you went into the White House, he was very friendly.
This is Andy Parsons, the country's most famous photographer, trusted by the great and the good. But the word photographer probably doesn't really capture the job of what Andy does.
You get that sort of little sense, you think, I've got to stick around, something's not right.
He's capturing history in real time and quite literally needs to be able to read a room and blend into the background.
In some ways, you are 2 or 3 seconds ahead of everyone else in a room.
But ultimately, how do you make pictures of politics interesting? What are you looking for? How do you take an iconic photo? We sat down with Andy to go through a dozen of his favourite photos of the last decade of working at the top of British society.
So worked personally for 4 Prime Ministers, the Queen Mother's funeral, the Queen's funeral, royal weddings, royal births.
In some ways, he's had an all-access pass to the major events of the 21st century.
I'm Andy Parsons and you're watching Jimmy's Jobs of the Future.
Who was your favourite leader to take photos, a foreign leader to take photos?
I would say, and I've said this many times actually, it's a good question, Jim. The French in general are good. But Macron, and I said this about when the King went over, well he didn't go, but prior to when he was going to go before he went to Germany obviously, and I said to a couple of the royal guys there, watch Macron, because we'd always go into a room with Macron and within seconds he would own it.
Yeah.
And I said to Boris a few times, I said, don't let him own it this time. Get in there, hands, start moving, start, doing things like that. Because what Macron does, he comes up and he cuddles up to you and he gets your arms and he's tapping you, he's holding your hands, or he's taking charge of that room. It doesn't matter if it's your by that room or his by that room.
He'll do it.
He's like, he's touching you, he's like, hands or anything, hey, how are you? His arms around you and yeah. And when the photographers are in there, because what would happen is you'd have the officials in there, so me and Macron's equivalent as well, who's a good friend, she's brilliant at what she does. So we would always stay in there, and then we'd leave them to have they'd bring in the press, and then we'd leave them for a bit for bilat talks, and then we would join in about the last 5 minutes again. And there was a lot of that going on. He was very aware, and not just with Boris, but I remembered at the G7, he was all over Biden. He'd spotted him, boom, beeline for him, and it's all about that looking out to the French people. Like, I'm in control. Like, I'm with the world leaders. I'm here.
Yeah, another famous one of that is like when Trump's got all the G7 leaders like looking at him with his arms crossed as well. I know you didn't take it.
No, that was done by the German official photographer. I forget his name. Jessica, I think. I'm good friends as well, and we're all friends. We're older, even the ex and the present official photographers. So we're all a bit of a club, really. As for Boris was just over a year ago now, in July. It'd been going on for some days, around the sort of 4th, 5th and 6th, I think it was. And he'd been holding on, and on a Wednesday night in the study, he said, look, we're all a bit tired. It's time to call it a day, and we'll be all right, holding on, sort of thing. Thursday, he said, let's regroup here tomorrow at 8:30, whatever, in the study. I get up there at 8. He'd got in before me, and as I got in there, they locked the door. I was like, oh, wow. I started photographing what was going on because there was a meeting around the round table, and there we are, locked in the study. I think it's all a bit strange. And then I start hearing the conversation. So, are you sure you want to do this outside the front, or are you thinking of another venue, or do you want to do this? And I was thinking, oh, right, it's done. Yeah. But you've got to keep going. This is just, now you're going to start again, because you've got these days, he's writing his resignation speech, he's going to go and do his speech, he's going to come in, the whole day is now 12 hours, 15 hours long.
Yeah.
And it's 8 o'clock in the morning, and we're locked in a room because it was dead secret. There's only about 10 people in there. And you've got to, they're obviously all looking sort of devastated. But you got to keep going. And then he goes and makes his speech and comes into his office, and there's a lot of tears.
And let's flip to the other side, because one of the most iconic images that's been taken, of course, is the of one where he finds out his exit poll result when he's in number 10 with Cameron as well. What was that like? Because that's a real, God, you've got to get that, mate.
Yeah.
Right?
It's almost like
if your camera's on the desk, you've missed it.
Yeah, exactly. And you're not. And the same with Cameron and Dean. That one there, and that picture has been used so many times around the world. And it like you say, I guess it's the equivalent of us from a sports photographer, like with a World Cup goal or something, the winning World Cup goal. It's that they sit there. Sport photographers, I used to do a bit of sport myself years ago on various agencies, but you really do have to predict that because the ball is, going all over the shop. With that, at least you can hear in the background the telly's on, blah blah blah. This is coming out, and the result is, and then it goes. And it was used as a wrap around the Sunday Times and constantly think. But that is minutes when he has just realised
that
he's just changed his political history.
Yeah,
with the majority. On the night that Cameron got in 2010, obviously he had the cabinet reshuffle, as the Prime Minister does. As soon as they get in, they have a cabinet reshuffle, and I would go in at the top of into the top of the cabinet room where the table is, and then the minister would sit opposite the Prime Minister, and they would be appointed to X, Y, and Z. And we got to a stage where actually he'd forgotten to appoint your dad as chief. So your dad went round and he wanted to sit opposite, and Cameron's like, no, you can just do it here. So and that made a funny picture.
Yeah.
And you just don't know. I didn't know that was going to happen. It's just that Cameron and your dad, Patrick, had such a good relationship that it was relaxed. In one of the pictures, there's Liz Truss is when she was Prime Minister, she's being briefed by a group of people in her office in the House of Commons on the day that the Queen died. Now she was in the chamber, and all of a sudden people like the Cabinet Secretary started arriving, CDL started arriving, and I'd been photographing her before because she was getting ready for the energy statement.
Yeah,
and then I saw
it was only her second day of the job.
Exactly. Wasn't 8th or so, I think it was that. Yeah, and anyway, these people started arriving. And because I'd been in that room so many times, the House of Commons room, and there I very rarely see the Cabinet Secretary, I was like, oh, right, what's going on? What's happening here? And that's when you get that sort of little sense. You think, I've got to stick around. Something's not right.
Yeah.
And then, as the picture proved later on, the rest of the team start arriving, and that's the Prime Minister being briefed on the situation that the Queen was deteriorating on that day.
And you aren't really told to leave the room often, right? There's a handful of times.
No, I reckon I would have thought about, on one hand you could count. I was very lucky. I had free reign of number 10, and you had to respect that as well, though.
The shadow cabinet when Brown's resigning, that's an amazing photo.
Yeah,
that is,
which I found last night as well. Looking for it, I was like, oh God, I remember that portcullis house. Is he going to resign? Is he? That's it. Yeah. Now you don't need to see their faces, and Brown is very small in the frame, but and also look at the mood though.
Yeah.
He's resigning, and they're sort of halfway to number 10 now. This lot.
Yeah. Exactly.
But you wouldn't think it.
It's a very
and that was May 2010, so it was a fair few years ago. I specifically remember going back to the days when Cameron was leaving, 2015. 2016 he left, didn't he? 2016. Sorry, 15 he won. I remember him writing he thought he'd lost his seat in 2015. He thought he'd lost his.
That's amazing picture you've got of that.
Yeah, that when he was writing his resignation speech.
Yeah, with Kate Ford.
2015. And this goes back to what we were talking about earlier on. I just never know where the day's going to go. Yeah. And there he is at 7, 8 o'clock at night in his back garden in Oxfordshire, writing his speech. And then they all went inside, and it was just me and him. And he goes, "Oh look, Parsons, we've had a ball. We've done it, but it is coming to an end. It's coming." And I was like, "Well, And then 2 hours later, or it might have been 3 hours later, I think it was at 7:15 or something like that. That is literally him writing it. And they're all getting it together, and you can see a few of them are quite sober and upset about it. And then 3 hours, that was 7:15, so by 10 o'clock the exit polls come out, and there's pictures of him jumping around his lounge in Dean, getting the majority, and he's over. And then, a year later, into 2016, there I am doing him surrounding in his box.
This picture, I wanted to ask about this, because this is...
Yeah, recent.
Yeah, this is...
it's just up on the campaign that we've done. But it was, again,
that's an amazing
right
shot
place,
of those colours, right?
Right, yeah. I mean, the wall lends itself to it, and the reaction, and just the way that is framed. And yet again, there were three of us there, three photographers. I decided to keep the net in because to me that's what you needed in it. And the pictures that I've seen, the net wasn't. They just centered in on the main subject, and you're a bit like, I don't understand that thinking, but still. And obviously, it's more the reaction of the actual members of their team, if you see it. The team, as it were, the basketball team. It's more their reaction that draws you in.
The Queen's funeral.
Yeah, so
that was one of the ones you picked as well. I was saying
simply because that's So the reason I picked that simply because I remember doing the Queen Mother's funeral.
Yeah,
and then obviously X amount of years later you're doing the Queen, and that's when you start realising just what you have done in the job. That you're now starting to see various events. So worked personally for 4 prime ministers. The Queen Mother's funeral, the Queen's funeral, royal weddings, royal births, coalition talks, Tony Blair coming in, and you start thinking of these events,
Brilliant. Andy Parsons, thank you very much.
Jimmy, thank you.